Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Speaking Legally, where the legal meets the cultural. Hey, Richard. Thanks for being one of the first to tune in. I'm going to be a little quiet today, y'all. I had to have what I thought was a minor dental surgery, so I'm not my usual chipper self, but I'm excited to be here with my co-host for another episode. This one is going to be hot. You want to share this out because the information that we're sharing, we don't know if you all know. So my name is Dr. Stacey N.C. Grant. Welcome to the show, and I'm going to turn it over to my co-host, Edward Pichardo, Esquire, and Royce Russell, Esquire, so they can greet you as well.
How we doing, folks? This is Ed Pichardo. Happy to have you here today. Once again, we hope you find this show informative and fulfilling for your mind and your spirit as well as your soul. So welcome to Speaking Legally.
I want to just say welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us for another segment of Speaking Legally. I'm going to try to help Dr. Grant out by taking some of the reins and trying to maneuver this episode. But as she said, it's going to be hot with information, because that's what we're here to do. We're here to give you information and tie it to the culturalism that we all experience. Nothing goes on in America without culture and money playing a part in either the problem or the solution. That's just the way it goes. And so, as promised last episode, we talked about we would continue our theme on probation, parole. We did parole a couple of weeks ago. Now we're doing probation. And, you know, the movement is forever moving. And that's what we wanted to do. And we want to discuss the case of Danielle Pruitt. This reminds me, before there was a Trayvon Martin, there was a Ramarley Graham. No one knows why certain cases get more publicity than others. But before there was a George Floyd or a Jacob Blake, there was a Daniel Pruitt. And we will discuss his matter, which happened in here, right in our home state, happened in New York, right up in Rochester. But before we get to that, let's drill down on what probation is. Are we okay to do that, ladies and gentlemen? Are we okay?
Good.
Good?
We good, baby.
Dr. Grant, can I move on?
Move on. You got it.
Okay. All right. So, you know, once upon a time, we talked about what parole was. And you can't discuss parole without talking about probation. And because we're a show that moves in real time, we had to hit certain subject matters that were very relevant, such as the 19th Amendment and the election that's coming up and the right to vote and the fact that we should vote. But that has not deterred us and steered us away from talking about probation, because probation is very important to somebody out there. So let's talk about the historical beginnings of probation. Probation was established sometime in the 1800s. And it kind of picked up some steam after the Second World War. And probation was the baby of the father of probation, which was John Augustus. And what this philanthropist would do is basically what he would do is put up his money and have people released. And they would be released, back into society. And he would try to get them employment and try to make sure that they are positive, that they remain a positive influence in society. Hence, the birth of probation. So probation allows a person that is convicted of a crime still to remain in society, and for which they have to serve a term of probation, which is somewhat equivalent to the term of incarceration, before they are free back in society without any restrictions, without any hesitations, without any rules and regulations. And this started to pick up steam back in the 1960s in the state of New York. And the Department of Probation is governed by the city and city government in the state of New York. And so, as I said, it allows people the right who are convicted to remain in society. However, it is not free. Department of Probation expects you to pay $30 a month, if not more, to help manage and to help guide you through your quote unquote term of rehabilitation while you're back in society. And as you know, there are various terms of probation, right? For misdemeanors, that's a 3-year term of probation. For felony, there's a 5-year probation period. But what people don't know, and I'm gonna say this out loud because I don't think a lot of people know this, is that you can actually be put on probation if you have traffic infractions. That's right, traffic infractions. If you have reckless driving, or you have parking tickets, if you have suspended license and you never take care of it, and often time after time your license gets suspended, you could be put on probation. And I bet you a lot of people didn't know that. And I bet you could be put on probation in family court. Now, one would say, I thought probation was always had to do with criminal, but yet no, in family court you could be put on probation. And what can happen that you are put on family court probation? 1, failure to pay any type of child support or any type of alimony. 2, if you are underage, if you are a minor, usually your cases are handled in family court and not in criminal court. And therefore, you could be put on probation for an alleged crime that you commit or a crime that you plead guilty to. Now, I will tell you, probation is not easy. Now, it is not easy because you're being watched and you're being monitored. Now, let me just take a step back. We talked about parole. Now we're talking about probation. Here's the difference. Parole, you will do time. You will be incarcerated. And the mission of parole is basically that you serve a certain amount of period of time, serve a certain period of jail time, for which then you're eligible to be released back into society. You have to be interviewed. It can go well for you or it can go bad for you. And as we talked about open dates, if it goes well for you, that is a date that you will be released. Whereas probation, rarely are you incarcerated, although there have been some dispositions that I have taken in my 23 years in reference to clients where they go and serve 6 months incarceration, and then they do 4.5 years of probation, rounding out to about 5 years, meaning that they were guilty of a felony. For probation, you never actually enter into a facility unless you've been held because you couldn't make your bond or your bail. And then when your case is resolved and you actually receive probation, you are released. Now, what is interesting about probation, and the reason why I say it is not easy, is because you have rules and regulations. Some of the rules and regulations could be jurisdictional. You can't leave the state without permission of your probation officer. Some of it might be you have to attend certain classes. You have to go to rehab, outpatient or inpatient. You may have to pay certain fines. If you are a sex offender, you will have to register with the town, county, state that you reside. And depending upon what level of registration, and it's usually 1 through 3, you cannot go on school grounds. You cannot be near a school with a certain radius. And probation will make sure, and a probation officer will make sure that you adhere to those conditions. Sometimes there's curfews where you have to be in your house at a certain time. One of the restrictions that everybody knows because they watch enough TV and it's talked about throughout is the fact that a probation officer can arrive at your house unannounced, knock at your door, arrive at your place of employment unannounced to check to see if you're actually at work, to check to see at your home whether or not your home has drugs or any illegal contraband, and to check to see if you are associating yourself with other felons. That means other people that have committed crimes like yourself or who are categorized as felons. So you can imagine living 5 years under that type of scrutiny and hoping that you have a reasonable probation officer that doesn't look to violate you in any shape, form, or fashion. And so that is important because if you have a probation officer that is not, let's say, culturally balanced, they can look to hurt you than to help you. And that can be a problem because then they can be an extension of your probation. I mentioned earlier about having a probation officer in your corner. And the reason why that is important is because during a 5-year span or a 3-year span or a 4.5-year span, everybody makes mistakes. And everybody may be somewhere that they're not supposed to. And you want to be able to have someone that is your probation officer that understands that. Because if they do not, they will violate you. And I know, Ed, you heard this term before, a VOP, a violation of probation. And as we discussed with parole, if you're violated in probation, then you could possibly wind up back in jail or in jail. And so there is a mechanism to deal with that, for which you have your due process, which is a hearing called a VOP hearing, a violation of parole hearing, where you will have due process to talk and discuss whether or not the crime you were charged with, which caused your violation, or the violation in and of itself, whether you missed curfew, whether it was associating yourself with a felon, whether or not that is actual and factual before you're actually violated. And I think
and Royce, if I may, we mentioned the last show, probation holds, parole holds.
Yes.
And I would imagine that's implicated during a scenario like the one you just talked about.
Right. So here you go. Once again, you could be accused of, let's say, trespassing, and you never trespass, but you're on probation. And now, because you're on probation and you have that other case that you're now fighting, the court can say, well, we're going to detain you until your probation officer makes a determination as to whether or not they want to violate you or not, and whether or not you need to stay in jail until the case is resolved.
So let me ask a question, Royce. When it comes to probation, how does that affect your record for people who have family members that are in this situation when they're going for employment? How does probation affect you versus being a convicted felon, criminal? Just explain that difference for the community.
Well, I'm glad you asked that because that was the next area of discussion. So what does it mean to be on probation? What it means is that you're just not going to jail. If you're convicted of a felony, such as unlawful possession of a gun, selling of drugs, attempted murder or assault, whether it's a misdemeanor or whether it's a felony, that's still going to appear on your criminal history that you were convicted of that crime. What bodes well for you is that although you might be convicted, you may have been convicted of that crime, the court saw it fit to allow you to have probation. That means in some shape, form, or fashion, the crime wasn't egregious enough to have you incarcerated, where you could not rehabilitate yourself in the mainstream of society. So that is the uptick of having probation. But that does not mean that you're not a convicted felon. You're still a convicted felon, or you still have a conviction for a misdemeanor. It's just that you are not incarcerated. Unlike parole, though, probation can be supervised or unsupervised, right? Now, unsupervised probation, you can earn or you can receive straight out the gate. And I see you put up the United States Probation Office for the Southern District, and that is very important because if you're charged with a federal crime and you receive probation, the same rules and regulations as in the state apply. However, the penalties are much more harsh. And they don't term it necessary probation, they term it post-release. post-release where you are watched after you are released or you are watched after you plead guilty. So as I said before, there is this entity or name called unsupervised probation. And what does that mean? Unsupervised probation means that you are now on probation. However, the Department of Probation and your probation officer does not think that they need to monitor you every week or every month. And like I said, you can earn that. You can be on supervised probation and prove that you are back in the flow of the mainstream society, that you're complying whatever, paying whatever fine, going to whatever program, employment, you're not committing the crime again. And so therefore your probation officer could say, you know what, I don't need to see you every week. Why don't you come in and you just put your hand on the scan machine and go take a test to see if you have any narcotics in your system, and then you can go on your merry way. And the reason why that is important is because if you're trying to maintain any type of employment, you want to ensure that probation is not intrusive on your employment, and therefore you don't have to worry about losing your job. So you can arrive at your probation, Department of Probation, as early as 7 a.m. Put your hand on a hand scan to show that you checked in. Take your urine out, take your urine test, and make sure that it's submitted to see if you're on narcotics or intoxicated or anything of that nature, or if you have to take Alcohol Anonymous classes. You could do that in the evening, and thereby still in the mainstream of society. And that is important because those are the things that you should be advocating if you're ever granted probation. And your attorney should be advocating for that. One of the things that we talked about in parole was whether or not you could be released from parole early. The same phenomenon is true for probation. You can be released from probation early. But what you have to do, you have to motion the court to do that. You have to have an attorney file a motion with the court requesting that you be released from probation early. And that can happen because you are 100% compliant. That can happen because you're 100% compliant and you're moving out of state. But it probably will not happen until you serve at least 50% of your probationary time.
If I may, Royce, there are also scenarios where, for instance, if you're moving out of state, you may not get off of probation early, but you may request that your probation be transferred to that other jurisdiction, and that other jurisdiction has to agree to monitor or supervise you.
And not only that, if you're from another state and the court in New York or New Jersey wants to give you probation, you have to do the same thing. You have to contact the state for which you reside and see if they're willing to take on the responsibility of monitoring you while you're on probation. So that's an excellent point, and it's something to be on alert for, especially if you're out of town and you come into New York or you come into New Jersey, and you, God forbid, you find yourself in a situation where you're fighting a criminal case. You have to understand that it's a two-prong test. One, you have to actually get probation in the state for which you committed the crime, and you have to have the state where you reside accept the fact that they will monitor you while you're on probation. And that is very important. All right. One of the things that we also talked about when we talked about parole was the many career opportunities that are out there in this area, for which, for some odd reason, maybe odd, maybe intentional, our community is not aware of. So what are some of the career opportunities? What are some of the areas for which we can look forward to using our intelligence and being part of the community and helping and rehabilitating those that may have run up against some criminal activity? So we have probation assistant, as one can imagine based upon the term, that is someone that assists the probation officer. We have probation officer trainee. We have probation officer 1 and 2. We have probation supervisor. We have probation director 1 and 2, and probation director 3 and 4, as well as, if you can imagine owning a franchise such as like McDonald's or Burger King, someone to actually be the regional director of probation, and they run that region. They run, let's just say, from Bronx to Queens. So they run not only Bronx, they run Brooklyn, they run Queens, they run, New York. There's always some hierarchy to report to. And so as we look at careers where we can be effective in our community, we should look to that, because change usually happens from the inside out and the outside in. It rarely happens one way.
Well, I think that we definitely must be reading each other's minds, because I brought up New York City showing and highlighting job opportunities and people who have transferred in to this field and career opportunities with probation. So Richard has a question. If the state that does not take on your case, does that mean you can't move to that location?
Well, once again, I would imagine unless the judge releases you early from probation, correct?
That is correct. If the judge does not release you early, you are what we call stuck in the bucket. All right? Now, Ed, you laugh at this because you've heard that term before, and part of our jobs as attorneys is to make sure that our clients, and look, levity needs to be in everything, but to make sure that our clients receive the least exposure as possible. And what do I mean by that? If there's a way for a guy to not serve 10 years and serve 5 years, as a defense counsel, we should be trying to get that client 5 years. That's what the family wants. That's what he wants. That's effective lawyering. Now, also, as an attorney and a counselor of law, having a tilt of culturalism and understanding of who we're dealing with, is that we have to take into consideration, am I really doing that person a great service by advocating that they receive probation if I know that probation is a catch-22? And what do I mean by that? A catch-22 is that you live today, but you die tomorrow. And what do I mean by that? I mean that, yes, you walk out of the courtroom today with probation. I'm free, y'all. All I got to do is serve the next 3 years on probation. Only thing I have to do is serve the next 5 years probation. I'm out. I'm home. I get my 3 meals the way I want to cook it. I can, roam the streets, see my lady, do whatever I want to do. The problem with that is that if you know you can't live up to the standards and the conditions of probation, and you know that in your heart, and your attorney knows that as well, then maybe it might be best that you just go do your time of incarceration. Because the jail alternative.
Yeah, and I've seen it happen.
Right? The jail alternative.
And I've seen it happen where individuals that are not going to be able to abide by the conditions will get that probation and violate it in short order and have this heavy, heavy sentence waiting for them once they are violated, versus going ahead and doing a shorter stint, just doing their time and getting it out of the way, which is unfortunate, right? But, at the very least, if they could go ahead and do that incarceration time and get out, then, that may be, the best outcome. And, you have some defendants who, or rather not, but clients who will say, listen, you know what? I'm not doing no probation. Just let me do that time so I can, be done with it. And, you end up appreciating the honesty, you know thyself, right?
Right.
You know what you're going to do and not going to do, especially when it comes time for the abstaining from alcohol or drugs condition of employment. If you know that you are a perennial drinker or a perennial smoker and you're not going to be able to abide by that condition, or if you do, it's going to be for short periods of time, then, you have to be honest with yourself.
And that's what I mean, the catch-22, right? As attorneys, we need to also know our client. We should be making sure that we have their ear, their good ear to say, look, let's not talk about this probation. If you know 3 months from now, you might violate this. Nobody can predict the future, and you want to put your best foot forward. But we also know what I call is the catch-22, and sometimes we have to say to our clients, it is better off you go do that 6 year, that 5 year, that 4 year, than rather do 2 years of probation, get no credit for it whatsoever, and then because you have to pay to play, and what I mean by that is that the DA is offering you 5 years now, straight jail time, and you're able to get probation, you better believe the jail alternative, if you fail probation, is going to be more than 5 years. And that's what we say pay to play. So either you're going to pay now, or you're going to play now, and if you violate, you're going to pay later. And so we need to be cognizant of that. I think, Ed, your statement, know thyself, echoes, because it is one of the things that is the toughest to convince or talk to someone that has never been incarcerated before, and they wonder why you advocating that incarceration might be the best thing for them. And go ahead, Dr. Grant.
Deborah was saying that, it's true. She's just saying, unfortunately, her brother's been dealing with this and out for 6 months and now back up because it's more challenging once you get caught or violate probation. So this is a point that I think we all need to have these conversations in our community. Everybody knows somebody. There's no need to feel ashamed or that no one is affected. Whoever you know, just let them know to have a good attorney, number one, so that when they're in this situation, that you can advocate for them the best route to help them get out of the criminal justice system.
And once again, you definitely read in my mind because you said everybody in the community, you shouldn't be ashamed. Everybody knows somebody that might be on probation. Well, drum roll, please. Some celebrities that are on probation or was on probation. Lindsay Lohan with drug possession. He had to do 3 months probation. Paris Hilton, 3 years for DUI. Mel Gibson, driving while intoxicated, 3 years probation. Nick Nolte, 3 years for driving while under the influence of drugs, probation. Kardashian, Khloe Kardashian, 3 years for DUI, driving while under the influence. We all know your main man, Ed, Chris Brown, 5 years for beating on Rihanna. Come on now, brother. What you doing with that right there, right? You know what I mean? And your other main man, Jay-Z, for allegedly stabbing Lance Rivera at the studio. Now, Lance told the DA that he ain't going forward, and a payout of $600K went forward, but probation nonetheless, right? And the person that we all speak about, we spoke about him a couple of episodes ago when we talked about parole, but is Meek Mills, who was on probation, violated probation, and immediately was sentenced to 2 to 4 years. Now he had a couple of violations. None of them were of the criminal magnitude, but eventually he wound up having to do somewhere between 2 to 4 years before the media got around him and the base was brought to look at probation and the disparities that happen within and how culturalism and color plays a part. So, this is my give back to all those who are out there, so we have a fair and full understanding of probation. And as Dr. Grant said, it's been happening to many, and I highlight some celebrities, and that takes me right into our next segment and our next area that we want to explore, which is Daniel Crew. This is a person that was killed at the hands of the Rochester police. This is a person that did not receive the media fanfare of a George Floyd or a Jacob Blake. This is a person that suffered from some mental challenges. This is a person that, like a client that I represent, Treywick Kowalski. Kowalski Treywick, who suffered from mental challenges and who wind up dying at the hands of the police.
This is
Yes.
Who's keeping an eye on that? Who's watching that? Because those are cases that happen every single day. It does not get the media fanfare, but we know it exists. And Ed, please bring us up to date as to what's going on in that matter.
Well, you know, the important situation with this case on a legal level is, I don't know if the audience has heard of the Freedom of Information Law. Okay, or you also have FOIA in other states, FOIA. Basically, in this case right here, this was an incident that occurred back in March and only came to the light of day on September 2nd. So, you know, what happened here? What happened here? So basically, what happens here is this. Back on March 23rd, 2020, at around 3 a.m., Daniel Prude, who's experiencing some, episodes and bouts with mental illness, is found on the street in Rochester, in upstate New York. Reportedly, he had broken some windows or damaged some property, not sure exactly which, and the police respond. In fact, his own brother called the police because Daniel had run out of the house half naked, and when the police encountered him on the street, he was basically fully naked, and he was ranting and raving. There's actually a video. It's extremely disturbing from the body cameras that the police officers had on, and the police, you know, they call out to him. As soon as he sees the police, he drops to the floor, puts his hands on his back, is handcuffed, very compliant. There's some back and forth in terms of him talking and saying certain things, and the claim is that he's spitting, which I'm not sure because I only watched the video once, but I didn't really see that. But there's reports that he was also claiming he was infected with COVID. So the police eventually put what they place on him, what they refer to as a spit hood, to prevent him from spitting onto them or anyone else in the immediate vicinity.
Ed, can I stop you for 1 second? You had mentioned what we call a FOIL, F-O-I-L, and a FOIA, F-O-I-A. And I just want to make sure that everyone knows that this is the Freedom of Information Law or Freedom of Information Act, as you state, and you don't need any attorney to put that request in for anything concerning any loved one, concerning any type of police assault, police brutality. Anyone can write for this request.
Now, I just want to give you a tidbit on that, because you know we can jump to that then. So basically, with the Freedom of Information Law request, that is a request, as Roy stated correctly, that can be made by anyone. And we're not just talking about police brutality and incidents such as these. We're talking about anything. Let's say they start building a bridge in front of your house, and you want to find out, you know, how did that happen? Who's doing that? If it's done by the government and there's some government action involved in that, then you have a right to whatever records are related to that. You can put that in writing, and most agencies, because we're talking about a per agency thing, and even if you get the wrong agency, normally you will get a response back saying, no, we don't deal with that, but this other agency deals with it. And so sometimes they'll move the request over to that agency, or they may ask you to do it yourself and send it to the right agency. And what happens is, if you want to practically do this, you say you live in the town of Beechester, and you decide you want to find out how many teachers are in the school system. You can look up the agency for that particular town. They normally have a prong on the website for requests, and usually there's a form on there, and you fill it out online, or you could do it the old-fashioned way. You could write a letter, put the stamp on that, and send it. I don't know if you want to do that right now, you know, with what's going on with the post office, but
what's your main man?
Exactly. But you know, you can do it in writing, online, sometimes by fax, because they accept faxes. You know, so every agent, every city, state, town, any municipality, any governmental entity has a FOIL request department form, and you can find out what's going on. So how does that relate to this right here? So bottom line is that this thing happens back in March. Now this thing happened 2 months before George Floyd. In this instance right here, this brother was suffocated with this hood on. Eventually he passes out. The ambulance takes him away. He's in a coma and he dies within a week on March 30th. The police chief, LaRon Singletary, apparently reports to the mayor, Lovely Warren, that, oh, this guy died from a drug overdose, when in fact, the day after, the Monroe County medical examiner stated that the death was ruled a homicide by complications of asphyxia, and talked about.
Can you repeat those names again, Ed? Who was the chief? Who was the
Okay, so the police chief of the city of Rochester is LaRon Singletary. Now he, quote unquote, resigned yesterday, but there was also a statement by the mayor that because of the entire leadership also resigning or otherwise moving, that he's going to kind of stay on to help with the transition. So, damn, what is that? That doesn't even sound like a real resignation. But anyway,
is it safe to say that person is not African American? Is it safe to say that the leadership in Rochester is African American?
Very, very. The mayor, Lovely Warren, is African American. The police chief, LaRon Singletary, is African American. A good part of the city council is African American, and they found out by a Zoom call, which I saw some footage of, that the police chief was resigning as it was happening. They were having a meeting with the mayor. Now,
the reason why I bring that up is that I want us to be clear. We are talking about law enforcement as it relates to our community. And I don't want people to get it twisted that it's always a black and white scenario.
No, absolutely not. In fact, there was an African American officer on the scene when this brother died. I mean, that's why, as we stated the last show, you can't always go by color. You got to study the people who are leading you, regardless of color, and look at their acts and deeds and see if they comport with what it is that you need, that you want, and your principles. And if they're not fulfilling those, then they got to leave. And that's what's happening right now. In fact, a number of protests have taken place since this incident. They're asking, they were celebrating that the police chief resigned, but they also want the mayor to go too, because they feel like this was an entire cover up. How does this happen in March? George Floyd happens in May. It's now August, September, and we still, now all of a sudden we find out about this. I mean, this is disturbing. It's absurd. And the mayor is saying that she didn't find out about this until the footage came out, I believe, like on August 4th. So, but still.
What's going on? What's going on?
September 2nd, when you and I found out about it. So why was there a month go by and you don't reveal this to the citizens of Rochester that this has happened?
Well, you know why. You know why? Because it's all in the media. Things are hot right now, right? And so we could just push this to the side and nobody will know about it. And this brings me to the point that I want to make before we move on, is that what people don't understand, we talk about a FOIA request, the reason why, whether it is FOIL or FOIA, the reason why that's powerful and important. And Ed, let's be critically honest here. As attorneys, there are a variety of attorneys, and we're no different to a degree. We hear the facts of the case, right? And we make a determination based upon the fact of whether we want to get involved in the case, right? And with the fact of this case here, someone has mental challenges, someone that may have allegedly been committed a crime, someone that a family member called, someone that where, police are responding and quote unquote are trying to do their best. There are some attorneys that when they hear those facts, they say, you know what, I don't want to be involved with this case. We've got too many little gray areas. It's not an easy victory. There's some obstacles, so I don't want to be involved. And then it's not until, and this law firm that's managing this case obviously did the right thing by entertaining a FOIA request and trying to get more information. It's not until you get to the truth of the matter that you realize that this case has very little to do with Brother Daniel doing anything wrong. It has more to do with the incompetence and the ill-equipped, ill-trained police officers that tried to manage this situation, and how they had no regard for his life, because if I'm not mistaken, nobody seemed as if they were in any dire need to remove this bag. And if I remember, the bag, you couldn't even tell whether or not what was going on inside the bag.
No, it's
plastic bag.
yeah, because they weren't even sure. They said, I believe, from what I recall, they were saying, oh, he's throwing up in the bag, there's liquid coming out, but they're not removing the bag. And by the way, before that, it looks to me like the bag, they're tightening the bag and holding him face down. I'm just going to leave it at that. I think that as bad as it is, for those who are interested in seeing it, you know, you should see it so that you can judge for yourself and come up with your own conclusions as to what happened here. The biggest problem here, though, Royce, is transparency.
And lack thereof.
And this is the deal, because, like, for instance, you and I both know, that when you hide things can just become worse and worse. It's worse when you hide things versus when you just come out and let the public see what's happening, and at the very least, you can say, well, listen, I just want all of you to know about this, and this is what it is. Here, I think there's a lot of blame to go around. A lot of people are being looked at. There are a lot of issues here. Cuomo says that the AG got the case in July, but there's a letter from the AG back on April 21st taking jurisdiction of the investigation of the matter.
Now stop right there, Ed. See now, and see this is why you and I, we ride on the same skateboard, right? So we talking about lack of transparency, right? The governor's coming out and saying the AG didn't receive something until July. I don't know why the governor feels a need to say it, but he says it.
Well,
right?
the reason I think is because the mayor, Lovely Warren, said, listen, I didn't come out with this sooner because the state was investigating it. She's claiming that the case went back to the state in April. So she's talking about...
Look, I know that she's throwing the state under the bus, right? By saying the state. So this is what we call hot potato. You know what? I happen to be eating some hot tamales.
Oh, there you go.
This is what we call hot potato, right? So, the mayor says,
the hot plátano.
The hot plátano. There you go, right? The hot plátano. The mayor says the state was investigating. What I don't understand about politicians and politics is that if you are more transparent, and even the police department, if you are more transparent than not, then people can digest the information better. So now you make this statement that says something about we didn't find out till July. Now you got the AG. Is that Letitia James? The AG?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. The sister Letitia James. Watch a woman work. Now watch her work. She goes, oh, no. You're not going to say that we got this in July. I put my stamp down in June, letting everybody know. Maybe not. July and June, that's a month apart. All right, forgive me. But the mayor, this happened in March. And so now the AG is saying, well, wait a minute, even though I may have said I have jurisdiction, that doesn't stop you, Mrs. Mayor, from you doing your work, doing your investigation. And so now you can see, I'll make the analogy, is 3 people driving in the car, police stop, a gun is found. Nobody's taking ownership. Everybody's pointing fingers. And guess what? All 3 people go to trial, and somebody eventually gets convicted based upon where the gun is located, but the fingers start to point. And
Now,
just like the defendants here, the fingers are pointing left and right.
now I just wanna point to folks and say this.
Yeah.
The lawyers here, the family lawyer, is a gentleman named Elliot Dolby Shields. And apparently, you know, as soon 3 days after Mr. Prue died, he did his due diligence. He puts in the FOIA request to make sure that all of the evidence is preserved. Good job, counsel. He then, later on, I think that month, I believe on April 27th, they filed a lawsuit, I would imagine, a notice of claim.
Right.
The Rochester Police Department actually files a response trying to clear these officers, even though this medical examiner report, you know, rules, you know, homicide. I mean, it's horrible. Then, so this FOIA request is put in April. You know, they don't get this stuff till, you know, they're getting dribs and drabs of information. They don't get the body cam video until August 20th. 88 minutes of body cam footage. And then it's the family that has to release it to the media, not the government themselves. The family is the one that has to do it. Good jobs for that family, activist citizens taking power into their own hands.
And we say power, protection, power and protection, and being prepared. And they were all three. You know, follow that notice of claim, put the city on notice that they're going to sue, even if they didn't have all the facts, because we know there's a time limitation on it, 90 days, right? Whether or not they had an attorney or not, they did that. Putting in the FOIA request, God forbid if there was an investigation where the DA's office was getting involved, because I've waited for over a year to get the Bronx District Attorney's office to make a decision as to Trawick Kowalski and his death. And all that did was hold up any information that we wanted to get by way of FOIA or otherwise, because there was a criminal investigation, a grand jury investigation, which freezes everything, because potentially that could be evidence. And it's not until as of recently we can start to get some of that information. So,
and I also want to point out, I'm sorry, Royce, and I also want to point out to our audience too that you could put in a FOIA request and you might get rejected, but you have the opportunity to appeal. And most of the time, I believe the timeline is 30 days.
Correct, 30 days, yes.
So what you do is if they tell you, oh, this is privileged information, or your request is too burdensome or too expansive, you know.
Boilerplate language we use all the time.
Yeah, you can put in an appeal, and sometimes you have to go through several rounds with the government to get them to release that information. But, you know, if you're really trying to get that information, you do the work and you do what you have to do. And I just want to mention that. So it's the Public Officers Law, Article 6. Okay, Public Officers Law, Article 6. That's the New York State FOIA law. And also I want to mention just briefly on a cultural level, right? Rochester is pretty much a black-led city, right?
Yes.
So one of the main organizers that's starting to really come out of this is a woman named Ashley Gant. She's with the Free the People ROC, which, you know, is for Rochester. And she's also an organizer for the local chapter of the New York Civil Liberties Union. So this sister's last name is interesting, right? Because Gant is a famous name in Rochester for the name of David Grant, who passed away on July 1st, 2020. He was the assemblyman for the city of Rochester for close to 40 years. And pretty much the leadership, and particularly Lovely Warren, is a protege of Gant. A lot of the folks in power, the black folks in city government, are people that came in through David Gant. So when this sister Ashley Gant is protesting and calling for the removal of Police Chief Singletary and Mayor Lovely Warren, people are like, whoa, wait a minute, one of Gant's own people is turning against, but she's not even related to David Gant. But the name itself is just a strange coincidence in all of this drama right here, because, right now, people are in disbelief that how could one of our own, knowing what's going on right now, hold on to this information and not put it out to the public? And, it's just, and I don't think, I'm thinking that I feel like this is going to go beyond this, because the more I'm finding out about this case, the more I'm wondering, well, why didn't other people, come out with this? Why did it all rest with the man, this police chief? It's because he was saying that Warren is saying that the police chief told her that he died from a drug overdose, when clearly that wasn't the case. Now, there were drugs found in his system, according to the toxicology report, PCP being among them, but still in all, he didn't die of a drug overdose, and just, there were actions that contributed to his death that were part of him being in custody and being detained by these police officers. They were active participants in his death, and the public needed to know about that in light of all that's going on. I mean,
so Ed, I want to just jump in for a minute, because we've covered so much about this case. One, we've let people know what's going on. I made sure that those of you that are viewing live, you can see the link and you can go review the article for yourself, because it is very detailed and it goes through all of what we've shared here today. Number two, if you don't have a copy of Cardiac Arrest, this would be a good time for you to get it, because the book speaks about the different kinds of cops. That is not just racial bias, it's bias of power and, abuse of that power, which has led us to this point. And the sister that you mentioned, Ed, I'm just going to play this clip as we start to wind down for today from the press conference of this young sister who is just raising her voice to what's happening. Well, as soon as we pass the commercial, that is.
Well, let me just say something while the commercial's on. Okay, hopefully it'll start.
Mm-hmm. My name is Stanley Martin. I'm an organizer with Free the People Rock, and I'm here today standing with the family of Daniel Prude, a man who was executed by the Rochester Police Department. I'm here with Daniel Prude's brother, Joe Prude, his family, and the attorneys who will be representing him. On March 23rd, 2020, the Rochester Police Department executed a Black man named Daniel Prude. Mr. Prude was naked, defenseless, unarmed, and experiencing a mental health crisis. Daniel's brother Joe called 911 for help. No one trained to respond to a mental health crisis arrived to the 400 block of Jefferson Avenue, but Rochester Police did. Daniel complied with all orders subsequently following their arrival. While cuffed, naked, unarmed, and laying down in the freezing cold ground, RPD officers mocked Daniel Prude, cracked jokes, and put a bag over his head. RPD officers Mark Vaughn, Troy Talladay, and Francisco Santiago then proceeded to swarm him. While Talladay forced his knee into Daniel's back and Santiago held down his legs, Vaughn pushed Daniel's head into the ground using all the weight of his body, essentially in triangle push-up position. Less than 10 minutes after Mr. Prude was cuffed, he uttered his last conscious breath. We are devastated by the loss of another Black life at the hands of the Rochester Police Department. We are disgusted that Mayor Lovely Warren and Chief Laurent Singletary have made no efforts to hold Daniel Prude's murderers accountable. In fact, Daniel Prude's killers are still on active duty today. We are livid that the Locust Club president, Mike Mazzio, uses his resources to defend the murderers, yet 2 days ago he publicly stated that Rochester does not have the problems other parts of the country have in relation to police violence. Knowing full well the RPD murdered a man in need of help, Mayor Warren rewarded the police with $100 million and also approved a new $16 million police station. It is abhorrent that Rochester has no capacity to respond to mental health crises in any other way than state-sanctioned violence and coercion. There is no place for police who are fundamentally violent workers in responding to mental health emergencies. To Lovely Warren, Loretta Scott, Willie Lightfoot, Mitch Gruber, Malik Evans, Jackie Ortiz, Michael Patterson, Lachey Harris, and Jose Pio, all who are city council members who have voted and supported spending on police violence at the expense of human life. Daniel Cruz's blood is on your hands. Free the People Rock stands with Daniel's family in making the following demands, and we expect them to be accomplished immediately. We demand an immediate arrest and firing of all officers involved, including and especially Mark Bond, Troy Talladay, and Francisco Santiago. We also demand the firing of officers who stood idly by while watching a man get killed. Their names: Andrew Spexor, Josiah Harris, Sergeant Michael Maury, Paul Ricotta, and Lieutenant Gregory Bello. We demand that the sergeants and senior officers who worked on covering up this murder through their police reports and bias investigation also be held accountable. Their names: Sergeant Florber Zelnovic, investigator Randy Benjamin, and investigator Michael Houlihan. The mayor and city council must also immediately pass legislation forbidding officers to respond to mental health calls. We must create an alternative to police for emergency responses, staffed by mental health professionals trained in the use of clinical treatment as alternatives to the police. We have no excuse. This happened on the watch of the city and on the watch of Mike Maggio and the police. We need to stop funding officers who terrorize, who brutalize, and dehumanize the most vulnerable of our residents. A naked, defenseless man was lynched, and we need to think about that in this moment within the Black Lives Matter movement context. We immediately asked for a defunding and then a disbanding of the Rochester Police Department. They have committed murder, and they must be held accountable. Up next.
So that I'll pause there. That was her portion of the speech before other people spoke at the press conference. Once again, you're able to view the contents and the facts that were reported in that article. And it just really gives insight on something that's terrible. My mouth is throbbing right now. I don't know if it's just throbbing from the pain I'm still in or the aggravation of seeing this happen once again in March before we got to George Floyd, as you opened up and said, Ed, this is crazy. And the fact that they are still on active duty, I have no words.
I think, I'm not sure the date of that footage, but my understanding is that they're suspended with pay. Right. They're suspended with pay. So, which is, they shouldn't even be getting any pay, but my understanding is that they are suspended. And
they'll talk about all the civil servant laws and why, they have to have due process, and this is why they're still being paid. But at the end of the day, we know what's wrong. And what I will put out there for all those that can hear, we have many organizations that have been seen around the world that are born and bred and originate in New York, marching in other states, doing the good work in other states, bringing a voice to the voiceless in other states. I don't think we need to take another step further, get on another plane, make another move before we go up to Rochester and shake our own state as to what's going on. There is no controversy, no conflict of fact as to what took place here. And before we can shine light in other states, we need to shine the light here. And so anybody that is out there that belongs to any organization, and I'm not going to name the organizations that I'm affiliated with and know me and I know them, but it is time for us to look inward and outward and take a stand within the state of New York, because it's not only Kansas City, it's not only Wisconsin, it's not only these other states that you see us active in, but it's in the state of New York. And if not today, then when? And if not us, then who? So let's tie the boots up and let's get going.
Absolutely. Amen.
Well, my heart goes out to the family that had to do so much due diligence on their own to even get us to this point. And thank you both for the legal meeting the cultural. That's what this show is about. It's about informing. It's about arming our community with the information that we need so that we can be advocates for the best results in any of these situations. So from the parole to the probation conversation, so you understand it a little bit better, we hope. And then for you to just share the word, use social media for good. Let people know what's going on in Rochester. And to Mr. Russell's point, let's get out here and put the pressure on right here in the state of New York. So I'll give you gentlemen an opportunity to say your goodbyes. Remember, you can connect with both of them on their websites as you see scrolling across the screen, RoyceRussellEsquire.com, law office of EdwardPichardo.com, and stay connected with us. Purchase a book at cardiacarrestbook.net so that you can have something. And as Mr. Russell likes to say, read something before you need something. Over to you, gentlemen.
And let me just say one thing is that I'm not just standing on the soapbox. I'm going to reach out to the firm from one lawyer to another lawyer. You know, this is not foreign to me. Like I said, I have Treywick Kowalski, another mentally challenged individual that was shot 4 times to death in his own apartment as the police opened up his door while he was in his apartment, yelling at him, telling him to put down a knife. And he's like, look, I'm cooking. What are you doing in my apartment? I am cooking. As the officer pulled out his taser, shot his taser, then dropped his taser and went for his handgun and shot him to death. So, you know, where there's the each one teach one where there's the hand to be held, you better believe I'm making my way to Rochester and we are going to become a queen.
And it's amazing that you say that, Royce, because actually Elliot Dobie Shields was on a panel and the topic was FOIL for the New York County Lawyers Association last year in May. So he's willing to teach other lawyers, or at least give of what he has to other lawyers in terms of this area of getting this information through FOIL. So, you know, ditto on that. I want to actually pull up that CLE, continuing legal education requirement seminar, and see if I can learn a thing or two. Sayonara, folks. See you next week. I hope you found the information on this show to be fulfilling and educational.
Take care and be well.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you to everyone who tuned in today. Richard, Isabel, Shawnee, Jason, Deborah, we appreciate all of you. And thank you for sharing the show, letting others know about what we do every Wednesday, 4 p.m. Eastern time. And thank you for the well wishes. Hopefully I'll be feeling a lot better next week. Bye for now, everyone.
Yeah.